Chapter 4. Now, I wouldn't normally be doing this, Hitch said as he opened up a section of the caravan. Armour is too heavy to be wearing all the time on the road. Flicking a catch, she swung open a door to display the wares inside. But now, we know we're having a choice. He took out a mail shirt and held it up to Cielo for size. She placed her arms through the holes and lifted it over her head, struggling to get it up high enough. A leather belt was wrapped around her waist to cinch in the mail shirt, and a short sword in its scabbard was clipped onto the side. He then handed her a buckler, instructing her to keep it on the side of her body facing the edge of the forest. She could hunker down behind that and should be safe for the most part from any kind of surprise attack that came their way. Cielo climbed up with some difficulty under the increased burden and nestled into her seat. Hitch could be heard clanking and cursing before appearing with a double-bladed axe, helmet, mail shirt, greaves, and van braces. One H to get this dirty before we sell it off. Try not to get any blood on it then, eh? Patting her on the leg, she whipped up the mules and they began off down the track they had seen the nightmare creatures disappearing along only a few short hours earlier. Why don't we turn back? She had asked after they had been travelling down the road for a few minutes. We need to sell what we've got to get supplies for the following year. Plus, it has been so terribly long since I have tasted a good stout, he solemnly stated. We have good steel and stout hearts. Let them come. There isn't a creature under these skies that can live when it's tasted this. He held up his axe for effect. The light glinted off the razor-keen edge, and Cielo started to feel more confident. She squared her shoulders and felt the comforting weight of the buckler by her side. She imagined for a moment ducking behind its hardened surface as arrows wicked and glanced off. She turned back to Hitch and gave him a thumbs up, the greatest vote of confidence she could bestow on him. I know she is not one of our kind, Red Ox, Hitch started to pray in his mind. But grant her your divine protection, for few of our race have ever held so true to your values as she. With that, he wiped a tear that had begun to form in the corner of his eye, hoping that she had not noticed, and took to scanning the road ahead as he cradled his crossbow across his lap. It was constructed of ironbark, so tough it could blunt an axe or sword swung against it. Felling the tree and preparing the timber had taken time and patience, as the cutting tools were resharpened again and again. No carvings adorned its length, as they would have taken too long to create. Oils had been rubbed into the grain until they had looked like smooth glass under the firelight. The bow and trigger mechanisms were cast from spring steel. The heavily braided rawhide bowstring had been lovingly soaked in beeswax to prevent moisture from soaking in and ruining it. The bolts were short, fat, and sharp. A foolish man would have been tempted to make the comparison to Hitch's physique. A circle of iron lay on one side of the wood, a square hole cut in the middle to accommodate a hand crank that would wind the cord back into the cocking position for firing. Hitch's bulging biceps made light work of the task, and he could loose a couple of shots per minute. He preferred to leave the weapon uncocked, all the better to prolong the lifespan of the braided bowstring. He knew it could quickly be brought to bear if need be. What's that up ahead? Hitch asked Cielo. Her keen young eyes could make out a caravan approaching them from a distance. Its wooden boards were colourfully painted. The pair sitting up front were costumed in loud flowing silks, their faces painted a riot of colours. Morning! They cheerfully called out, waving as they came abreast. Hold up there, Hitch instructed, his palm held up flat. Cielo drew up the mules and they met the confused gaze of the harlequins across from them. There are nightmares stalking men in these woods, Hitch began. You would be well advised to turn around and go back the way you came. He pointed down the trail of the strangers had just come. I say, are you doing some kind of monologue? Like an audition? One of the pair asked. Because we aren't really in the market for any new talent right now. Hitch's eyes bulged for a moment, his nostrils flaring. Are we in a bakery? Then why do you confuse me for a cream puff, such as yourself? Hitch cursed at the colourful duo, who wrinkled their nose at being spoken to so plainly. You know, there's no need to take that kind of tone. Already regretting his decision to stop and try and warn his fellow travelers about their impending doom, Hitch did his level best to try and contain his rising anger. My tone. Last night we saw men who wear the skins of reptilian beasts ambush and butcher a man like a hog before the festival. Hitch's tone finally conveyed the gravity of the situation in which they found themselves. Clutching their hands to their chests and looking about themselves nervously towards the woods that lined either side of the track. Then we thank you for your warning, and we'll be heading off at once. Cielo held up her hand, her trembling finger pointing down the track in front of them, causing the others to turn in their seats and look back. Hitch! She cried out in alarm. The beasts had emerged from the trees lining the path, standing boldly in line across the hard-packed dirt. It was somehow more shocking to see them in the daylight, all the more terrifying to know that they were not some figment of the darkness that would disappear with the dawn. Dark cloaks swept down from their shoulders. Hitch began to lift the crossbow from his lap, the hand crank sliding out from its hidden place to be clicked into its square socket without even looking down. One of the creatures held up its sword, licking the dull spine of the steel without breaking eye contact. Wings. They've got bloody wings, he realized, as they suddenly burst into action, sprinting towards them. Ah! One of the painted pair shrilly screamed over their shoulder as the nightmare was rushing towards them. Thrashing their reins, the horses suddenly shot forward, kicking up clods of dirt as they desperately tried to race away. Their caravan was overloaded, however, with costumes, props, and enough makeup to supply a royal court for a year of social engagements. Their horses strained, hooves slipping. The creatures were on them in a moment, ripping the pair down from their seats into the dirt. Falling on them like hunger-maddened wolves with snapping jaws that ripped delicate flesh like tissue paper, sending blood spurting like berries flattening under a hammer blow. Unable to turn, Cielo and Hitch had no choice but to charge the remaining attackers that blocked their path. They parted before the charging mules, taloned hands reaching up to grasp for the pair. Hitch hadn't been able to load his crossbow in time, so simply spun it around and used the butt of the weapon to cave in the snarling face of his attacker. The hardwood meeting little resistance as cartilage bent and skin split to blood-gushing effect. Cielo lifted up her buckler, leaning away from the creature. Its claw appeared over the edge of the shield, pulling it down to reveal its bestial face. Its look of triumph turned to confusion as Cielo lifted the mini crossbow to its eye level, depressing the paddle trigger at almost point-blank range. The small bolt pulped the creature's eye, the steel point passing through the brain matter to pierce the back of its skull and emerge on the other side. Its grip on her buckler went slack as it fell away and disappeared from view. Faster, girl, faster! She needed no such encouragement as she cracked the reins. The mules were just as scared by these strange new creatures and pumped their legs as hard as they could to get away. Clods of dirt flung up as their shod hooves dug deeply into the ground for purchase. Hitch cranked the handle of his crossbow, clicking the latch into place. Turning in his seat, he looked behind them, but he could only see the side of the trail as they sped along. Standing on the seat, he climbed up onto the flat roof of the caravan for a better view. Cielo turned for a second to see him disappearing from sight, before turning back to watch the trail ahead. She didn't know what the plan was, other than her instinct to put as much distance between herself and them as possible. When Hitch had built the caravan, he had placed boards horizontally along each edge, half of their width sticking up to create a small wall all the way around. It had been a design feature to help keep any luggage strapped on top of the caravan in place, but it now served as an impromptu crow's nest of sorts as he sighted down the crossbow. The creatures looked up from their victims, gore splattering their faces and necks, to spy their comrades laying limply in the road with the caravan rapidly shrinking in the distance. Shrieking their rage, they were up on their clawed feet, sprinting just as the mules had started to slow, unable to keep up such a frantic pace. By Redox, why are we slowing? Hitch thought to himself as he felt their pace begin to slacken. Unable to leave his post to see what the problem was, he had to trust her to solve it. Sighting down the crossbow, he watched as the first beast pelted into range. Hitch took a deep breath, holding the crossbow steady as his target sprinted towards them. The winged creatures pursuing them were named by their creators Draconians. Neither their name nor their reputation had travelled so far west this early in the conflict they would grow to be known as the War of the Lance. The process of their creation was far from an exact and measured thing, the resulting temperaments varying as widely as the breeds of canine or feline alike. These Draconians had been sent ahead in small hand-picked bands to act as terror troops behind the lines to slake their thirst for slaughter as they pleased ahead of the marching columns to follow in their wake. Far from the bustling cities and even the quaint villages that dotted the countryside near their valley home, Hitch and Cielo had been sheltered from news and rumours that flowed like lifeblood along the trading lanes. Hitch did not need to know the name of his enemy, of the thing of slashing claws and gnashing teeth that closed the distance with every stride as their mules already began to tire. He had travelled to many of the darker corners of Krynn and seen creatures unrecorded in even the greatest of libraries and collections of volumes espousing the completeness of their knowledge. Everything that drew breath could bleed. Every skin could be pierced by sharpened steel or speeding iron. So it was, with a grim determination and the hint of a satisfied smile playing on his lips, that Hitch squeezed the trigger of his crossbow with a firm, measured pressure that would not pull the point away to the side, causing a shot to veer wide of its target. Jam! Hitch roared as the Draconian leapt high into the air, wings snapping open to catch an oncoming wind. It sailed upward for a moment, gazing skyward until its head snapped down to lock onto its prey. Drawing in its wings slightly, it sped towards the top of the caravan. No time to reload, Hitch held up his crossbow sideways in a quarterstaff block. The Draconian crashed into the hardwood, the momentum carrying Hitch backwards. Cielo jumped at the thunderous crashing noise right behind her, spinning in her seat to see the Draconian's fangs bared, roaring in hateful rage in Hitch's face as he desperately tried to hold it back with his crossbow. Before she could even think, her hand was already raised, pointing at the gaping maw. A metallic click, the twang of the string, and all in a flash the delicate bolt disappeared into the slavering void. The tip pierced the back of the throat, the soft flesh parting as it bored in between two vertebrae. The spinal cord severed, the Draconian slumped forward onto Hitch, only its mouth spasming as it struggled to perform the simple task of breathing. He struggled for a moment under the weight, panicking that he wouldn't lift it until he rolled over onto his side and the burden came with him, flopping awkwardly, limbs askew. The jostling ride shook and bounced the beast onto the edge of the caravan until a swift kick from Hitch sent it past the tipping point. It fell for a moment with none of the grace or artifice it had shown in its soaring leap and swooping dive, impacting into the dirt with a force that drove the air from its lungs and sent a cloud of dust shooting skyward in its wake. "You know I had that under control," Hitch gasped in between breaths as he struggled to recover from the exertion of the life and death struggle from mere moments before. "Better you be keeping your eyes on the road for a turn-off," he panted. "You're welcome," Hitch called over her shoulder. She spotted a fork in the road up ahead. The branching line had no signpost to mark its way, with the overgrown appearance of a path infrequently travelled and fallen into disuse. Taking the turn at a trot, they quickly disappeared from view as the trees gathered close to line the path, their branches forming an archway overhead.